since I'm on this talking about Japanese kick, let's go straight to this movie or TV show, Shogun. I have multiple problems with this show that I think a lot of people look over because they like the way the show looks. But some people give it a very high review, and one of them is the critical drinker. And of course, he expands into the politics of the show. I also want to talk about the whole there were black people in Japan at this time, so why isn't there even one black person? Let's get into it.
Truly, modern entertainment is chock full of surprises. I mean, most of them are the bad kind of surprises, like that time I went to a mate's house after drinking 2 pints of brake fluid and personally took a dump in places that'll leave him feeling confused for the rest of his natural life. But occasionally, the festering swamp of raw sewage that is modern Hollywood offers up little nuggets of quality entertainment, one of which just so happens to be Shogun, a historical drama set in 17th century Japan that I could best describe as Game of Thrones but with samurai. And I mean,
Now, I don't want to jump in too early, but I have to at this point. First of all, the first seasons of Game of Thrones were way better than this show, the entire show. Also, the characters were deeper, well thought out, and all of that, but we'll get into that later. I also want to make sure that people understand that this show has too many flaws for it to be taken seriously historically. And I don't mean it's a historical thing like a documentary. I mean, literally, it relies too heavy on stereotypes.
in the good Game of Thrones, when it was still a smart, intriguing, and imaginative story about power, politics, and ambition, populated by a diverse cast of complex and well written characters, instead of friggin' barbecue time at the Danny Ranch. Anyway, I digress. Now, not being particularly familiar with the James Clavell novels that it's based on, or the 1980 adaptation, I didn't really know what to expect going into it. But what the hell, I'd enjoyed Blue Eye Samurai, and I still had fond memories of playing Ghost of Tsushima, chopping up bamboo and composing haikus like an absolute boss.
Okay, I will also admit that I didn't read the book and I didn't watch the old movie, partially because why would I? It's gonna spoil this movie, but show. But you know, let's see what else he has to say.
Plus, just about everyone I knew online and in the real world was singing its praises, so I figured I might as well dive in and see what all the fuss was about. And I'm very glad that I did, because Shogun is a superb piece of entertainment, brilliantly written and directed, moodily evocative, perfectly paced, competently acted by a cast of experienced veterans and talented newcomers. It's a show that uses universal themes of loyalty, duty, honour, and sacrifice to explore a very alien culture in a way that never comes across as preachy, self-righteous, or patronising.
Okay, so he said a lot there. Does it look pretty good? Yes. Does it have good actors? Absolutely. At no point did I see weakness in the acting. Does it have everything? Directing, writing, all of that. It's got a lot of that. But it also has flaws. But I can't get into it because he hasn't talked about it yet. But first, I want to play something for you so that you can understand where I'm coming from before we continue to watch this. Because some people might be looking at this as like, just look at how beautiful it is and move on.
I tried watching it, dude. I really liked the premise. I really liked
Yes.
the synopsis and stuff, but I didn't get into it. I think they like super Hollywoodized it. Like there's some shows that have such a good premise and you're like so ready to dig your teeth into it, but they put this crazy big Hollywood gloss on certain shows that just make them unwatchable.
Like, what do you mean? I'm curious.
Okay. Say like there was a good idea. You hear a good premise for a show, but just because how it's acted, a lot of the commercial themes, the direction, the plot goes, how things are edited, how slick it looks, like the music. There's so many different layers of Hollywood polish. It's basically the equivalent of a girl who already is really good looking, and then she puts on like 50 layers of makeup, and then she looks like a disgusting clown. That's what they do to a lot of TV shows that have like a lot of good promise and have a really good core idea. They Hollywoodize them and bastardize them to death for the mainstream audience, which sometimes a good couple shows get through the cracks. Sometimes they get the 50 layers of polish on them that
I'm gonna give my super hot take on a show that I think does this. You ready?
Okay.
Half of chat is gonna be super triggered, half are gonna agree with me a ton. I 100% think that this happens Westworld.
Now, I know you're probably thinking, what does that mean? What does it mean, this Hollywood gloss? I want you to watch Critical Drinker's video where he shows Shogun, and I want to keep this phrase in your mind. In a dark world with dark people walking around in a barely lit area with nothing but darkness, even inside the houses where you need to see it's dark. Everything is dark. They fight in the dark. This is Shogun. The whole movie just looks dark. But for what reason? Japan is a pretty bright place. In fact, if you look at the paintings that some of the stuff is based on, they're pretty well lit. But because of Hollywood, it's got to be dark and gritty. That's how you know a movie is good. That's how you know it's going to work.
My goodness, I think I'm starting to remember this now. This is what good TV used to look like, isn't it? This is what a faithful, intelligent adaptation of good source material can and should be, unlike other shows I could mention. Anyway, the story's told mostly from the point of view of John Blackthorne, an English navigator on a mission to establish trading links in Japan and break the stranglehold of the Portuguese that have been intentionally keeping Japanese society ignorant about the wider world and have designs to covertly take control of the government there.
Without relating this to the real character, this John Blackthorne character is a pretty shady character, and his mission, while he's not a pirate, he's like a pirate adjacent, where his mission is to do some pretty violent things to other ships that are not from his nation. This guy is as much as a colonist as the Portuguese are, so I don't want you to take away from what he's saying as if this guy has come here with nothing but good intentions. Although William Adams, who is based on the real person, who came maybe with not such good intentions, ended up just being an asset for the Japanese. This is partially due to the fact that he got shipwrecked and was basically would have a way better time in Japan than he would in his own country, which is going to go against something that is constantly played in this movie, in this show.
Fortunately, their supplies run out along the way and the ship washes ashore, with Blackthorne and a handful of survivors all that remains of the crew. Pretty soon he's taken captive and falls under the influence of Lord Toranaga, a powerful member of the five-man council that now runs the whole of Japan since the previous ruler died. Toranaga himself is caught up in a growing power struggle amongst the ruling council, and it seems likely that war is on the way. But in Blackthorne he might just have found a powerful ally, because the man has access to guns and cannons that could turn the tide of the coming conflicts. The only question now is how to make use of him. The more time Blackthorne spends amongst Toranaga's people, the more he comes to understand Japanese culture and society, and begins to unmask a tangled web of alliances, conspiracies, betrayals, and secrets that threaten to change the face of the country forever.
I don't disagree with most of what he just said over there, so time to move on.
Now, I'm not going to go into too much detail on the plot because honestly, I don't want to spoil it for anyone. What I will say is that I was extremely impressed with how the show manages to find that sweet spot of narrative depth and complexity without getting bogged down by it.
Now, here's where I have to disagree. First of all, I want to say something that is it's going to be very foreign to a lot of Westerners, but I think a lot of people elsewhere in the world are going to know exactly what I'm talking about. The problem with these movies is that they rely too heavy on culture. In this Japanese movie, it relies way too heavy on culture. Only two people in this whole show really have personalities, and it's that John Blackthorne guy, and of course a bunch of the Portuguese, and the Japanese dude whose name is Kashigi Yabushige. And for some reason, every other character is so bound by honor. Now, they make things that don't make sense, given how bound they are by honor. But for some reason, the whole show is like, they're bound by their honor. and because they're bound by their honor, they do not stray away from their honor. The whole thing, the whole show, you will see this theme go on the whole time, and they try to hammer this in that these people's honor or whatever their dedication to the culture is just so, or the king or whoever. Meanwhile, this person, this Blackthorn character, is basically a modern European in almost all ways. In the way that he basically relates to life and everything, he comes across as a modern European. This guy would have been one of the most opportunistic people, but you don't see that in the show.
Different characters, factions, and conflicting goals and motivations to keep you guessing about what might happen next, but the script never overloads you with so much shit to keep track of that you forget what's happening and why.
I'll be honest, Andy Milonakis was talking about this at the time. The problem is it doesn't overload you. It doesn't give you deep reasons for why people are doing what they're doing. They just happen to do them randomly. And you can see there that, he says, oh, they don't overload. Go watch the first season of Game of Thrones and you will realize that there's an overload of characters. You can still keep up with it if you're not an idiot, as that guy said, Andy Milonakis said. If you don't have a you don't have a very low IQ, you can still kind of keep up with the people, with the story. But this thing of like you've gotta make it so simple that even the stupidest person can keep up with the story. This is the problem.
The show takes its time introducing the main players and giving you a decent insight into who they are and what they value before turning them loose and letting the sparks fly.
Okay, so he says that the show explains the characters and who they are. Who is this woman in the show? If you watch the show, I want you to explain to me who this woman is. Now, here's some things that you're not allowed to explain. You're not allowed to explain her as a woman who's bound by her honor, because that's everybody in the show. What is it about her personality that is unique or different than any other You could literally make her a male and the story would be just about the same. I mean, it'd be homosexually themed, but it would be basically the same character. Nothing about who she is stands out as an individual, except that she is bound by her honor like every other person in the show. Now, I know what some people are gonna say, but wait a minute. Doesn't she cheat on her husband and with this European dude, and then also she, tries to protect him by fighting these other people and blah 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 blah. That's what happens to her, not who she is. Who is she? Like that Blackthorn guy, I can say he can be very serious, he can be very playful, he can be very confused, he can be very. I've seen him do all of these things in a deep way, not just in one scene or something. This is just who he is as a person. But if you look at this woman, 90% of the time she's super competent. 90% of the time she's super loyal to her customs and culture, to the point where she's like, I have disobeyed this and that. I will take my life or whatever. She's basically as good as any other samurai in this show. So what makes her different than anybody in this show? By the way, here's something very important to keep in your mind when you go, okay, fine, but she cheated on her husband. Okay, this woman is bound by her honor, and she cheated on her husband because apparently he's abusive or something, which is like, okay. And then this Blackthorn character is given a consort. Well, I think he's given a few, but he's given a woman that he can sleep with. But this shady character refuses to do that because, of course, we know, navigators back in the day would go to foreign lands and refuse women because of their loyalty to this other woman that he just met in Japan. This is why I say he's a modern character, because of his loyalty and love for some random woman who's his translator who he just met. He's gonna refuse a woman, and of course that was done so that he was looked at a little bit like a good guy. I mean, this dude would be sleeping with every Japanese woman that he could get his hands on, but they have to make the love between them so strong because, that other guy is abusive, while this navigator dude who came in with some strange tactics and some strange ideas, by the way, if you don't believe me that sailors did that, go Google any wide scale navigation, including the one of the Japanese people, and see if these people refused women. On the other hand, these Japanese people who are bound by honor, they seem to be very lecherous in their desires, while this person who, I don't know what he's bound by. He just, he's just loyal to some one woman because, of course, no, guys, you can't do that. You can't betray the one you love by going against her and sleeping with other people.
A window into this alien world is Blackthorn himself, the classic outside protagonist looking in, who asks the questions the audience would ask and gets the explanations they need to understand the world he's part of now.
Now, as simple as the story is in terms of the whole honor and culture thing, this guy does not get the answers. This guy is kind of an idiot in the sense that he keeps getting surprised by the honor of these people, even though it's so linear. Like, he's surprised, like, oh my god, she's gonna do what to herself because of honor? Oh my god, that guy took out that thing that smells and now they did what to him because of their honor? As linear as their honor thing is, this guy is constantly surprised, kind of a mook.
It's a trope that's been done a million times before in stories like this, but there's a very good reason for that. It's effective. And credit to the writers here, they successfully avoid the shitty modern trope of making him just another arrogant white man who needs to be humbled and beaten over the head with his own bigotry.
The reason why he's not just another white man who needs to be humbled by his bigotry is because the people who made the show are just white men who need to be humbled by their bigotry. Now, is he just another white man? Absolutely. Absolutely. Like, tell me why this guy is not a modern person in his character, the way he behaves and his thoughts about freedom, which, by the way, were non-existent at this time, and the way that he believes women should be treated, and the way he's so surprised by violence. Why is a man who's a navigator at this time, who literally has, basically gone against the Portuguese, the Spaniards, and all these other people, why is he so surprised by violence? Like some kind of guy who came from college today. It's weird. It's lame.
In reality, he's a smart and resourceful man who learns fast, can turn situations to his advantage, and is willing to risk his life for others. And the more you learn about him, the more you begin to understand that he's a complex man, driven by far more than simple greed and ambition.
Now, Blackthorn's character is much more wide than what he just explained, but I want you to compare how he just explained Blackthorn to how he's about to explain this other Japanese character. Remember, torn. This person in the beginning, he seems like he's this selfish guy, but you realize he's actually this deep character who's not just driven by survival and blah. Now let's see how he describes the other guy.
And he's perfectly balanced out by Toranaga, played by the always enjoyable Hiroyuki Sanada. Toranaga is a man torn between duty and survival, surrounded by political rivals and traitors, and trying to walk a dangerous path towards a better future for his country and his people.
Yep. That's his personality. Honor and survival. Barely cracks a smile because the honor is overwhelming over his shoulders. But how could you? How could you, when the survival of your people is in your hands? How could you betray your honor and survival and honor and survival and honor and survival? When you honor and survival the whole thing, you gotta honor and survival.
At first he sees Blackthorn as just a simple tool to be used, but the more time he spends with him, the more he comes to understand and respect the man beneath. Wow, two guys from vastly different cultures with completely different worldviews, slowly finding common ground through shared adversity and challenges without having to demonize one and elevate the other. Imagine that in 2024.
Now the scene he shows is one of the most ridiculous ones in the show, where this white guy teaches this Japanese guy how to swim. First, he explains, like, I want to learn foreign tactics from this European guy. So I want him to take some of my men in a rank for this person who obviously has no battle skills, but I want him to, teach us. And then he says, the first thing he says is, I want him to teach me how to dive. Now, this would be a very special scene if it wasn't for the fact that the Japanese have something called soijutsu, which is literally competitive or combative swimming, or where diving is a common practice in Japan forever. Two completely different cultures. Swimming is important in almost every culture that has combat, because you have to swim in the water if the battle is taken to the water. And no place in history had more skills in the water than the Japanese, and obviously the Europeans and all the other people, but the Japanese were well ordered and very capable of diving and taking to the waters. But for some reason, this guy takes this. In fact, it literally says here, many schools taught methods of swimming in armor. I'm telling you, this is a modern European guy. Let's just teach him the art of the Olympics. Something that the Japanese didn't know about back then. Now, you could say that the scene where he is making this guy jump over and over again to teach him how to dive was more of a loyalty test than it was a test about swimming. But this is not what the critical drinker is taking away from this specific scene. He's taking it away like two lads just taking a thingy together without demonizing the other. Actually, it is demonizing the other because it's making the other one seem like it's less skilled than the other. Like, oh, the European white savior is going to come with his European tactics and defeat the Portuguese, who already came with a lot of these European tactics, by the way.
At first he sees Blackthorn as just a simple tool to be used, but the more time he spends with him, the more he comes to understand and respect the man beneath. Wow, two guys from vastly different cultures with completely different worldviews, slowly finding common ground through shared adversity and challenges without having to demonize one and elevate the other. Imagine that in 2024.
Now, to address the part where he says that, look at this, two cultures just chilling, not demonizing each other. Now, maybe he's not familiar with history at all, but the Europeans literally demonized anybody who wasn't a Christian, and the Japanese were not Christians. And so they literally demonized them and their religion and anyone they met at the time. Secondly, the Japanese demonized the Europeans as unclean savages, literally giving them the name Southern Barbarians. These are some of the images they used to depict some Europeans, and they looked at some of their facial structures as deformities. So this idea that it's just two guys having a chat is weird when you're trying to demonize today's demonization, demonizing the fact that people back then used to demonize each other way more than they're demonized today. The Europeans were so demonized that they literally got banned from Japan for hundreds of years.
The third aspect of this dynamic is Mariko, a young highborn woman with strong loyalty towards Toranaga but religious sympathies towards the Portuguese, who acts as an interpreter for Blackthorn and grows close to him as a result. She's
Loyalty, survival, loyalty, survival. What's her personality? Who is she?
Intelligent and cool under pressure, but again, the script never devolves into the tedious tropes of modern writing by turning her into an arrogant, abrasive girl boss who only exists to be better than him at everything. Oh my goodness, it's almost like this show was written by mature, well-adjusted adults who understand human behavior.
Now, I don't understand what the word girl boss means to him, but this girl literally is a girl boss in the whole show. She literally fights men in martial arts, which would probably result in her certain death. She takes on very powerful people in very strategic and, in some cases, very stupid ways that would have easily resulted in her death. Another thing is that she literally put her life on the line to save everybody else when there's also men in the room who didn't do the same. This woman is literally the definition of a girl boss. Now, I agree with you that that's bad, the girl boss thing, where they just try and make women too competent in shows. But she's, you just said it, she's the super intelligent, blah, blah, blah. She is a girl boss. You should have a problem with that. How competent she is, considering how naive she is in almost all other ways, especially her loyalty. She's like so naive to loyalty. I mean, think about it. You just mentioned it. She's loyal to the Christian cult to her own, demise. She's, loyal to the Japanese to her own demise. Well, near demise many times. And she's loyal to this European who she's tasked to translate for, again, to her own demise, to the point of even betraying her husband. So, this woman is naive to loyalty to a weird way, which, by the way, the story would have been way better if they made her seem like she cared about loyalty, but at some points made it obvious that she didn't give a damn. Of course, she doesn't. But instead, it's just, I'm trapped between things are just happening to me by accident, which is weird.
Also have to give massive props to the production design and cinematography here. Japan of the early 17th century is depicted on screen in glorious detail, from humble...
Well, since he's taking his precious time repeating something he said in the beginning, let me repeat what I said. Barely lit is not gorgeous. It's a cheating trick that people use. And even the lost seasons of Game of Thrones. Go look at how well lit Game of Thrones was early, and then go look later. In a tactic that Hollywood uses, they sort of darken everything and hide everything in the shadows. It gives this feeling of darkness and artsiness, but at the same time, you can't see anything. There's no real detail. That's what's happening here.
Fishing villages in the early morning mist, to towering fortresses and bustling but well-ordered cities that actually feel real and lived in. Even simple little moments like people pouring tea and staring pensively over perfectly manicured gardens and peaceful forests look absolutely gorgeous. God damn it, why does 17th century Japan look so much cooler and more sophisticated than all the clutter and chaos we have today? Unlike so many other shows, you never get the sense that you're looking at an obvious set built on a soundstage that totally takes you out of the experience. And truly,
we don't. Well, some of you will have realized by now that these guys barely go outside in the show, even though it's about warriors and people like that. But for some reason, they spend a lot of time indoors chit-chatting like the stereotype of females. But, we have to remind people they're in Japan, so Japanese architecture has to be everywhere, because they have to be in Japan, even though like a lot of meetings and stuff like that would have taken place in the woods and undisclosed locations, so that you can send messages and stuff like that secretly. And I mean, it's not as honorable as you'd like to think it is. It's not just a bunch of people sitting down on the floor staring at each other, coming up with what's the most honorable way that we can fight each other. Hey, but don't forget that we have to resemble the honor of the... Now, I want you to look at the scene that is somewhat outside. As you can see there, that guy is, well, kimono or whatever, the guy who's riding the horse. It's not as fantastic as you would like it to be. It's very brown and crumply and stuff like that. But that's good, because that sells reality more than the fantasticalness of the other scene where the girl is fighting those several dudes, and it sort of gives a fantasy effect about it, almost like it's fake, a too glorified version of what happens.
What an experience it is, capturing that fascinating combination of strict tradition that governs every word and movement, the slavish pursuit of perfection where even simple morning meals are treated like works of art, and the merciless enforcement of respect and authority where a single insult can mean death. Yep, that's the problem. The slavishness to their culture is a pretty big problem. But the part where he says a single insult could result in death, that's true of a lot of cultures back in the day if you're close to the king. Now, here's something that I want to mention for anybody. William Adams sort of
was like, hell no, I'm gonna stay in Japan because here I'm a noble, whereas in in Europe he was just like a sailor or whatever the hell he was, and married to one woman and da da da. Now you'll be surprised to know that William Adams, when he was offered a concubine, he took it with both hands, while this guy here is too loyal to do something like that. And of course, Critical Drinker likes the fact that, oh, every little detail is governed by the culture. That's dumb. Have you ever read any books about Japan and how everybody used to cut corners and not give a damn about the rules? Like when they weren't allowed to go certain places and they would like cross through the bushes in order to break the rules. Like certain farmers weren't allowed to eat, certain foods because of strict rules, but then they did it anyway. Or people who didn't pay all of their taxes. There were definitely things that were 100% done pretty well. Japan would definitely have been considered, especially Edo, would have been considered a very clean area compared to the rest of the world back then. But, that those are stuff that the people who are in charge can control at a deep level. But each individual citizen was not as dedicated to life as those people were. And oh yeah, that's what I wanted to say. If death and blah 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 was around the corner in the same way that it is in this show, where you have to mind your p's and q's this deeply, there is no way that anyone would want to be part of the ruling class. Let's just appeal to human nature here. Could you really live up to all of these rules just as a human being? It would be too overwhelming. And probably that's why they would have to do this thing that they did that ended their lives so in the name of their honor. Maybe they're just too tired of the rules.
Is that the world of Shogun feels real and believable.
No, it does not. Now, I will say this. I did enjoy it, but it doesn't feel real and believable. It feels very fantastical. And dare I say it, idealistic. It feels very idealistic. Now, here's the thing. Don't believe everything the samurai say about themselves. It's like believing everything the knights said about themselves, or believing everything that Zulu warriors said about themselves, or believing everything that Genghis Khan said about his warriors, or anything that the Iroquois said about their warriors. They're obviously going to overplay their honor and everything like that, because that's kind of the name of the game that they want to spread to the average person.
Battle and action sequences are well staged and suitably gory, and it all gives the impression of a big budget production that had a lot of time and care and thought put into it. A show that values quality, accuracy, and authenticity over the message, whose main focus is telling a good story rather than pushing tedious 2024 activism.
Boy, where did that come from? I'm glad, by the way, that it doesn't push any message like equality or anything like that, because of course that wouldn't depict the reality of the time. Now, should you just portray elites in a civilization? Does that give a accurate, realistic, blah 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 blah? No, it doesn't. So I don't know why he appreciates it not using the message when that could actually give a more fuller and more real story as compared to this idealistic, super blah 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 world. But I can understand why he likes it. He agrees with the message of this one, which is Japanese culture super intact, almost robot like, and European men come in with good intentions, except obviously the Portuguese. They're very evil, of course.
It's a show that I've had an absolute blast watching so far, and to be honest, I think you will too. So for that reason, it gets a hearty recommends from me. Anyway, that's all I've got for today. Go away now.
Well, that was his take on it, and I can understand why he thinks it's amazing, because it stereotypes Japan to the nth degree, and that message is very cool. But if you've ever watched Rurouni Kenshin, or you've ever watched any of these other things made by Japanese for Japanese and to some degree for a European audience, you will notice that the characters are way more character than these people in here. I remember watching Blade of the Immortal. Go watch that. Go come back after you've watched Blade of the Immortal and then tell me if you believe that these characters are real characters, when in those ones you've got, oh my god, the way that they behave is crazy. This is an image that depicts black people with the Portuguese in Japan. This image is very important because it shows you how many black people there were in Japan at the time who accompanied the Portuguese. And these Portuguese people were linked with other black civilizations, like, for example, the Kingdom of Mozambique, the Kingdom of Congo, and stuff like that. This is why we assume that one of the black servants of the Portuguese, Yasque, was from Mozambique. That's because they had a proper standing at the time right there. So why then are there no black people in this show? Now, I don't mind it too much because of course there would have been a minority, but not even one. Not a one. Nobody. Even though we can see that the Japanese people were curious themselves about black people. And not only that, when when you look at these images with the Portuguese, they come with their servants, and sure enough, some of the servants would have had done menial labor, which, by the way, that's why there would have been a good number of them because they're gonna do the stuff that these guys think they're too good to do. And then, secondly, there would have been ones who were just coming because they were good at navigation or whatever, because that's how the Portuguese made it to India, made it to China and places like that, because of the sailors from Africa on the side who taught them about the winds and the seas and the currents and all the other stupid stuff that happens in those regions. They even took some from Ceylon and brought them to Japan. I mean, I showed you that part of the story where the Portuguese were being expelled out of Japan. And when that dude expelled them, he said, "Oh, yeah, all of you can leave except the black guy, the black slaves, they can stay." And they took high positions in Japan. But where are they? Where are they portrayed? Nowhere. Now, I get it. It's based on an old story that was already done, so why throw in some black characters now? No point. And you don't even have to have black characters. I don't care. The problem is that this portrayal of Portuguese not surrounded by black people around them, which they would have absolutely done, as you can see in these images, it's kind of weird.